The first time I met Billy 45 years ago, he was cast to play my best friend.
And I got to tell you, Billy is really, you're my good luck charm. Billy is in 3 films that I made, and all of those films are in the National Film Registry. So, Billy, you know, because of you.
The first time he met Billy Crystal was 45 years ago, when Billy was cast to play his best friend. What began as a role quietly became a bond that outlived sets, schedules, and success. Billy would go on to appear in 3 of his films, each later preserved in the National Film Registry. It was never spoken of as luck, but there was an understanding between them that some collaborations shape a life more than a career. When word spread that Rob Reiner had died, Hollywood did not erupt. It slowed. Conversations lost momentum. Rooms that were usually loud felt suddenly restrained, as if the air itself had thickened. It was not shock that dominated the moment, but a heavy stillness, the kind that arrives when something foundational has ended. Reiner's work had always centered on connection, on loyalty, on the quiet weight of human bonds. His passing reflected that same restraint. There was no spectacle, just an absence that resisted explanation. The farewell took place far from cameras, inside a small chapel in Brentwood. No press, no rehearsed remarks. White flowers lined the aisle. Candles burned without ceremony. The room was filled only with those who mattered, standing close, shoulder to shoulder, sharing a silence that felt deliberate and final. Many believed the service would end without words. Then Billy Crystal stood. He did not rush. He did not perform. He stood with his head lowered, as though measuring whether speech itself was possible. When he finally spoke, his voice faltered. He acknowledged that Rob had leaned on him in his final days, and that he had not fully understood how much weight Rob was carrying. The room tightened. This was not a polished tribute. It was a confession, arriving too late to be answered. Rob, it became clear, had borne much of his burden quietly, allowing even those closest to him to believe he was steady when he was not. That realization settled heavily in the space. Friendship does not reset after moments like that. Regret does not dissolve simply because time continues forward. In the days that followed, Rob's name surfaced again, not publicly, not dramatically, but with increased gravity. Behind closed doors, in late-night calls and private conversations, the language shifted. No one spoke about films. The same people who once debated scripts found themselves circling a single question, asked without expectation of an answer. Inside the chapel, nothing moved. Candlelight reflected off dark wood. The silence pressed inward, unbroken and inescapable. When the back door opened, it did so quietly. Billy entered without looking around, holding a small bouquet of white flowers. A card, folded and unfolded until its edges wore thin, was tucked between the stems. His steps were slow, deliberate. His shoulders sagged under a weight that felt older than grief alone. He stopped in front of Rob's portrait and remained there, suspended between approaching and retreating. Then he placed the flowers carefully, adjusted the card, and turned toward the podium. There were no notes, no preparation. He took the microphone and waited. "I hate having to do this," he said softly, "because if I'm standing here, it means Rob is really gone." There was no movement in the room. No response. The words did not ask for one. Billy spoke of a man who never sought attention, who made people feel steady simply by being present. If you needed Rob, you did not have to ask. He was already there. His life was shaped by small, consistent habits. If he said he would call at 8, it was always 8, never early, never late. After every performance Billy gave, Rob sent a brief message. Nothing elaborate, just enough to say, "I saw you. I'm here." He always asked the same question, "Are you okay?" And he waited for the answer. If silence came, he allowed it. If the answer was no, he did not rush to repair it. Where others offered solutions, Rob offered presence. He did not push past pain or try to quiet it. He stayed, patient and unguarded, allowing space for whatever needed to exist in that moment. That was the man Billy described. Not one who fixed things, but one who remained. And in the quiet that followed, it was clear that this constancy, so reliable, so understated, was the very thing now missing. As Billy spoke, his hand tightened almost imperceptibly around the microphone. Rob had never tried to soften pain or explain it away. He didn't intervene or attempt to rescue. He stayed. He sat beside Billy long enough for the moment to pass on its own terms, without pressure, without urgency. When that truth settled in the room, the air grew dense. No one shifted. No one looked down. It was clear this was no longer a prepared reflection. This was something unguarded, drawn from a place Billy had never intended to expose. For a brief moment, the world outside pressed in, the familiar language of a film remembered and quoted, a line from When Harry Met Sally that once carried humor and warmth. But the reference passed quickly, almost reluctantly, as if it no longer belonged in the space. The room returned to stillness. Billy turned slightly toward the row where Rob's family sat. He did not seek their eyes. His voice softened as he spoke of what stood behind Rob all along: family, constancy, and Michelle. The place Rob returned to when the noise faded, where laughter did not need to be performed to be real. Billy let the thought rest without elaboration. If Rob was the laughter the world recognized, Michelle was where it finally came to rest. He bowed his head toward them. Nothing more was needed. When he faced forward again, his voice lowered. The memories slowed. Something he had tried to keep contained could no longer remain untouched. Billy admitted there was still one unread message from Rob. A simple one. There had been plans, too, nothing grand, just a meal scheduled for the following week. And there was a sentence Billy had delayed saying, convinced time would allow for it later. He stared ahead and spoke quietly. I thought we still had time. After a pause, almost to himself, he added that later had taken it away. He closed his eyes and remained there, motionless. The silence that followed was not intentional. It arrived because there was no other response available. Grief moved outward, filling the room without needing words. When Billy opened his eyes again, he did not rush. He seemed to consider whether what came next belonged in that room at all. When he spoke, his voice carried a different weight. He shared something Rob had once told him, never meant for public hearing. Not to assign blame or invite judgment, but to offer clarity about the kind of man Rob was. Rob disliked complaint. He avoided turning personal struggle into shared burden. If something could be carried quietly, he carried it alone. Billy spoke briefly of their work together, of shared history preserved on screen, but the details felt secondary now. What mattered more were the nights when Rob called late, not to vent, not to seek answers. Sometimes there were no words at all, just long pauses, the kind that confirm presence when nothing else will. After sitting in that silence, Rob would ask questions that had nothing to do with films or careers. He asked about fatherhood, about watching a child change and not knowing how to remain close without doing harm. One night, Rob asked plainly what a father was meant to do when it felt like his child was slowly moving out of reach. Billy understood then that Rob was speaking about his son, Nick. For years, Nick had struggled with substance dependence, testing the endurance of the entire family. They continued to try, again and again, even when hope thinned. There were many attempts at recovery. None brought lasting stability. Rob never treated those moments as conclusions. To him, the count was irrelevant. What mattered was not accepting that the story was finished. What mattered most was that Rob never allowed himself to believe a setback was a conclusion. Billy did not dwell on specifics. He didn't need to. He said Rob had lived through too many near moments, almost peace, almost stability, to misunderstand where the real pain lived. It was not in the collapse itself, but in the helplessness of a father who could not remove his child's suffering. After every relapse, Rob asked the same question, quietly and without accusation. What did I miss? Where did I fall short? Billy was careful to explain that Rob never spoke with anger or blame. He spoke like someone balancing on a narrow line, afraid of saying too much, afraid of saying nothing at all. He was not trying to control the outcome. He was trying to love correctly. Billy came to understand that Rob's concern was never about fixing or managing his son's life. It was about ensuring one thing remained clear: no matter how unstable everything else became, his son would never have to face it alone. Whenever Rob spoke about Nick, there was no bitterness in his voice, only fear. Not fear of exposure or judgment, but the fear of making a single mistake that could not be undone. Rob admitted there were good days. Days when Nick seemed present, clear, grounded enough to suggest that stability might still be possible. Those days gave him hope. But there were others. Days when Rob could not tell where his son was mentally, could not read what was happening behind his eyes, could not know whether stepping closer would help or cause harm. Billy said what exhausted Rob was not anger, but uncertainty. The long nights waiting, the dread of unanswered calls, the familiar tightening in the chest before answering the phone, the constant replay of unanswered questions. Did I say enough? Did I miss something that mattered? As if that weight were not already enough, Rob confessed another concern, one he struggled even to articulate. He worried about money and inheritance, not from mistrust or resentment, but from fear. He worried that giving too much, too soon, without the right structure, might not protect his son but weaken him further. The thought of preparing a will kept Rob awake, not because he resisted leaving something behind, but because he feared leaving it the wrong way. His love was inseparable from responsibility, and responsibility sometimes required restraint. In quieter moments, Rob admitted something harder still. He feared there were times when his son was not entirely himself, when confusion overtook clarity and judgment slipped away, not from malice, but from disorientation. Rob stopped himself there. He offered no detail, no explanation. Billy said the absence of words said more than anything spoken. Only later, standing at the farewell, did Billy fully understand why that fear had never loosened its grip on Rob. Not because Rob foresaw an ending, but because it represented the deepest anxiety a parent can carry, the possibility that love alone may not always be enough to protect the child you would sacrifice everything for. What stayed with Billy most was knowing Rob carried that fear in silence. He never turned it outward, never allowed it to harden into blame or withdrawal. He stayed, he kept calling, he kept showing up, he kept waiting. Rob believed that presence mattered, even when outcomes remained uncertain. But time has a way of testing even the most carefully held beliefs. The fear Rob tried to set aside did not disappear. It deepened, settling into a question without resolution. Standing there, in the stillness of that room, Billy understood something he could not avoid any longer. Rob did not move through his final years guided by love alone, but by a quiet, persistent anxiety that never offered resolution. Billy shared a sentence Rob once said that stayed with him long after it was spoken. "I can direct everything on a film set, but I can't direct my son's life." The words settled heavily in the room. Rob had questioned himself in small, private ways, whether there were moments he dismissed too quickly, moments when he should have stayed longer, listened more carefully, asked one more question. It was not dramatic regret or visible guilt. It was the slow, internal reckoning of someone replaying ordinary moments, searching for the one choice that might have altered everything, while knowing that some scenes cannot be rewritten, no matter how desperately you want another take. Billy was clear about one thing: Rob never turned away from his son. Not once. No matter how difficult the days became, he remained present. He kept calling. He kept showing up. He held on to a steady hope, not naive, not dismissive of reality, but grounded in the belief that presence still carried weight, even when certainty did not. As Billy spoke, Rob Reiner began to shift in the room, not as a filmmaker, not as a cultural figure, but as something more exposed. A father living with a fear that felt fragile and deeply familiar. The kind of fear anyone who has loved a child would recognize immediately. Billy said that if people were going to remember Rob now, he hoped they would remember this: not perfection, not answers, but a man who did his best in circumstances that offered none. When Billy placed the bouquet down, time seemed to slow. His hand released the flowers, but his gaze lingered, as if physical distance did not yet mean emotional separation. And to understand why a few sentences nearly broke him, you had to return to the beginning. Because to Billy, Rob was never simply a name etched into film history. To the world, Rob Reiner was a legend. To Billy, he was something closer and heavier, someone whose absence reshaped his own story. Rob had witnessed nearly every chapter of Billy's life, from the early uncertainty of finding his voice to the moment that voice became unmistakable. They met before recognition carried weight, before success felt secure. Same generation, same timing, a shared rhythm that favored observation over noise. Their comedy was rooted in attention, in watching people closely and understanding the quiet truths beneath everyday moments. Rob never saw Billy as a comedian chasing laughs. He saw someone who could articulate feelings people already carried but hadn't named. And Billy never saw Rob as merely a director issuing commands. He saw someone who could turn ordinary human exchanges into cinema without stripping them of warmth or restraint. They could argue over details, one word, one pause, a single beat of silence, but those debates rarely hardened. They ended in laughter, anchored by a mutual understanding that honesty mattered more than being right. That understanding was evident when they worked on When Harry Met Sally. Rob stayed behind the camera, calm and precise, protecting the story's rhythm. Billy carried that rhythm outward, using tone and restraint where excess would have failed. The film did not rely on spectacle. It lived in dialogue that sounded simple but carried deeper anxieties about love, loneliness, and time. To many, it was a romantic comedy. To Rob and Billy, it was confirmation of something unspoken, that they understood each other without explanation. Afterward, life moved them in different directions. Rob continued telling the stories he believed in. Billy continued acting, hosting, and making people laugh in a way that was distinctly his own. They worked together less often as the years passed, but the connection never loosened. It was the kind of friendship that didn't rely on frequency or reassurance. One call was enough. One quiet sentence, "I need to talk," and the other would be there, not to offer solutions or take control, but to sit beside him, to listen, to ask a single, careful question, and then remain silent if silence was what the moment required. That was who Rob was. Over time, their friendship lost whatever shine it might once have carried. There were no public displays, no shared appearances, no need to prove anything outwardly, just presence. And that was precisely why, when Rob began to worry about his son, Billy was the person he reached for. Not because Billy had answers, not because he could change the outcome, but because Billy would not turn fear into conversation for others, or pain into something consumable. He would keep it where it belonged, contained, private, and human, between two people who trusted each other completely. It's often said that friendships in Hollywood are transactional, built on momentum and mutual advantage. Rob and Billy never fit that narrative. They didn't need each other to rise higher or be seen more clearly. They needed each other to stay grounded. Rob knew Billy before the name carried weight, before it filled rooms or opened doors. He was there during the quieter stretches, the uncertain years when Billy himself questioned whether he had enough to continue. That history is why, at the farewell, Billy did not falter because a public figure had died. He faltered because the man who had walked alongside him for decades, quietly, steadily, without ever demanding attention, was no longer there when he placed the bouquet down. It was not just a goodbye to a friend. It was a goodbye to a chapter of his own life, to a version of himself that existed only because someone else had been there to witness it. The moment ended the way it began, in silence. There was no applause, no movement. The room remained still, as if everyone understood that sound would only intrude. Billy placed the microphone down gently, almost deliberately, as though he was careful not to release anything else he wasn't ready to lose. He walked toward the exit slowly, his shoulders slightly curved forward. Whether from exhaustion or from having left too much of himself behind, no one could say. That was how Rob Reiner's journey closed. Not under lights or cameras, but in quiet presence, surrounded by the people who truly knew him. What he left behind was more than films woven into collective memory. It was a way of storytelling shaped by patience, restraint, and deep regard for human connection. From laughter to silence, Rob understood that stories did not need to raise their voice to be felt. The memories Billy shared were not offered as spectacle or sorrow, but as a reflection of a life lived with care, of someone who knew how to listen, how to remain, and how to support others without drawing attention to himself. Rob Reiner moved through life the same way he moved through stories. He didn't rush emotion. He didn't force meaning. He trusted that if something was true, it would find its place on its own.